Hello there, Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, council members, and members of the public. My name is Tatiana Arno. I am your city engineer, and I am here to present the pavement management update. So the recommendation is that the City Council receive a report on the pavement management program, provide input, and direct staff to either one, fund ongoing street pavement conditions at an average pavement condition index, or otherwise referred to as the PCI, level of 65. This can be achieved within the current budget and no additional funding is required. Or number two, to identify funding to support improving pavement conditions to an average PCI level of 70. It is anticipated that this will cost an additional $43.7 million over the next 3 years, or $14.6 million annually. Or number three, identify funding to support improving pavement conditions to an average PCI level of 75. It is anticipated that this will cost an additional $116.1 million over the next 5 years, or $23.2 million annually. So we use StreetSaver as our pavement management system, and this is used for tracking inventory, storing work history, estimating costs, and identifying candidate streets for potential repair and maintenance. Our street inspections are performed on a 3-year rotation, and it's done by consultants. The one we currently have on board is Pavement Engineering Incorporated to do this work for us. And basically, they evaluate 1/3 of our residential and collector streets each year, and they actually do 100% of our arterial roads each year as well. So our arterials are done every single year. Our residential and collector streets are on a basically 3-year rotation. Here is a sample of the StreetSaver dashboard. It gives you at a glance some data points for our pavement index. And so it'll show you the historical condition trends and what the current PCI is, remaining service life, things of that nature. And so this is updated periodically as PEI performs these inspections as well. And of course, whenever we're done with any sort of reconstruction or overlay, that actually gets incorporated into the system as well, and it's updated in real time. So our consultants do use a variety of measurements to determine what the actual PCI level is. This may include how many cracks there are in a mile of pavement, how deep those cracks are and how long they are, what the crack pattern is, and what percentage of the road segment displays the deficiencies. We then here in Public Works review this information and consider how this timing matches with, let's say, our cast iron pipe replacement projects, and how these streets can be grouped to maximize cost effectiveness and efficiency. So the more streets that we can group together in the same general location, the more cost savings there are, because it's essentially the same cost to mobilize the contractor to do that work in that area, whether it's only a few streets versus, let's call it, triple that amount. This analysis is then used to create our pavement management program, and that's how we come up with the recommendations for projects. Here's a PCI chart that we included in here just to give you a relative idea of what PCIs mean. And so anything that's 80 to 100 is very good or excellent, 70 to 79 is in the good category, and so on and so forth. So what does our city street system look like right now? Basically, our arterials, which make up 28.6% of the total system, we're actually up at a PCI of 73, which is in the good category, right? And we want it to be there, and we want to make sure that we're maintaining our roads in at least at that level. And so that actually means that as a city, we are in a pretty decent spot with regards to our arterials. Now, for our collector and residential, each of those are at approximately 64 PCI. And this is as of January of this year. That's when the pavement management plan was last updated. And so what that tells us is that while we're not exactly in the good category, it's still, they're not in the worst shape, right? So there's still some work to do to improve on that. However, especially when you're looking down at our alleys, which make up only 7.7% of our system, but that average PCI is 24. So that is an extremely low PCI level. And I understand that the community, especially those that live adjacent to those alleyways, are very well aware of the poor condition that these alleys are in. But with that being said, the average PCI for the entire system, including arterials, collectors, residential, and alleyways, is currently at an average PCI of 64. So some of the projects that we have pending right now are, we actually just completed the Rice Avenue stopgap project that had an average PCI of 19. And why I'm saying that's a stopgap is because we have a Rice and 5th grade separation project coming in the next couple of years with a lot of heavy machinery that will be coming down Rice Avenue. So if we did a reconstruction of that road now, we would actually be reducing the lifespan of that by allowing all this heavy equipment on it. So in the meantime, we did some microsurfacing and other improvements that are less expensive. However, once the Rice and 5th grade separation project comes through, we'll go ahead and do the full repair to Rice Avenue. So you'll see more work happening there a few years from now. And then from there, going down the line, we are currently in construction for Bryce Canyon South neighborhood and Fremont North neighborhood. We're in the design phase for the alley reconstruction, also in the design phase for La Colonia neighborhood resurfacing, same with residential neighborhoods for various residential streets that are throughout the city, but have an average PCI of 25 or less. And moving on from that, we're about to get into the design phase for East Gonzales Road, the Rice Avenue commercial neighborhood, West Gonzales Road, and Teal Club Road. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about Measure N, but we can't talk about Measure N without addressing Measure O. So Measure O is a voter-approved half-cent general sales tax that was created to provide protection and maintenance of vital city services, including the rehab of streets. It brings in approximately $16 million on average in revenue for the city, of which $1.66 million is dedicated annually for debt service for the street resurfacing bond, which is set to expire in June of 2029. Measure O itself currently is set to sunset in March of 2029. So now that we have a general idea of what Measure O is, Measure N was passed by voters this past November, and it implements specific requirements on Measure O revenue tied to the overall conditions of the streets and alleys. So essentially what Measure N says is that we need to reach a PCI of at least 65 by September 30th of 2022. Otherwise, if that is not met, Measure O would expire on March 31st of 2023. Subsequently, we are to reach a PCI of at least 70 by September 30th of 2024. Otherwise, if that is not met, Measure O would set to expire on March 31st, 2025. If we need to reach 75 by September 2026, otherwise, Measure O would expire by March 31st, 2027 if that is not met. And lastly, we would need to reach a PCI of at least 80 by September 30th of 2028. If not, then Measure O would expire on March 31st of 2029. Now, Measure N also does include in it that City Council could extend Measure O's termination for additional 5-year periods if the average PCI for streets and alleys was at least 80. So it does have that provision in there to extend Measure O potentially. So let's get into the numbers here. So the current estimated funding we have available for street resurfacing for basically this is over the next few fiscal years, but basically in this current fiscal year, we have about $13.7 million, and that's a lot of the work that you have already been seeing being done out there. I've already mentioned Rice, we did Saviors, we did Rose, we've done Vineyard, Esplanade Drive, C Street, and so on and so forth. So that was already planned work before Measure N even came into the picture. So that work continues. Next fiscal year, we have an estimated $1 million coming from the 2014 lease revenue bond that will be going towards La Colonia neighborhood. And then we're expecting $6.8 million through the Road Maintenance and Rehabilitation Act funds, or RMRA. And every year subsequent from that, we're estimating we'll be receiving about $4 million a year. So that's the guaranteed funding we have. Outside of that, nothing is guaranteed, right? So that's where council needs to come in and make decisions and take action. So what is the anticipated investment to reach these PCI levels? So basically, to reach a PCI of 65 by 2022, we need about $18.6 million. And if we go back to the slide we had before, we currently have between now and then $21.5 million available to us to try to meet that objective. Well, the good news is that we could meet that objective by 2022. And so therefore, that means that we should be able to extend Measure O at least a couple of years because that PCI will be met. Now, here's where the decision making comes. To reach a PCI of 70 by September of 2024, we need a total amount of $73.2 million. We currently have $29.5 million that we can rely on between now and then, which leaves us with a gap of $43.7 million. To reach PCI of 75 by 2026, we need $153.6 million. We estimate we'll have $37.5 million between now and then, which leaves us with a gap of $116.1 million. And finally, to reach PCI of 80 by 2028, we need $236.1 million. We estimate we'll have about $45.5 million available to us, leaving us with a gap of $190.6 million. So what is our investment versus return here? So I already explained that the good news is we will be reaching PCI of 65 by 2022. And therefore, the net benefit for Measure O is actually we get to keep Measure O. That gives us $16 million across the board. Now, to reach a PCI of 70 with that $43.7 million gap, we would actually need to invest the majority of the Measure O revenue, which would be diverted into street rehab, right? So basically, all of the services that were being provided by Measure O otherwise would now basically have to either fall under the general fund or some decisions need to be made there separately, but the majority of this funding would be taken from Measure O into streets. And essentially what happens then is if we do that, then we have $4.3 million in excess of Measure O funds that could then be placed back into those services and programs that Measure O typically funds. So that is a net benefit there. To reach a PCI of 75, it's a different picture now. So we would basically be taking the entirety of Measure O, putting it into streets and streets only. And on top of that, we would be dipping into the general fund by another $36.1 million in order to achieve that goal. So there is no net benefit for Measure O because everything for Measure O just went to streets. And finally, for PCI of 80, with that $190.6 million gap, $112 million would be coming from Measure O. Again, Measure O would be tapped out, and then we'd have to then tap into the general fund at about $78.6 million more to be able to actually meet that goal. So it's not just about funding to make these things happen, right? The more work we do out in our streets, that means the more resources we need in-house to be able to achieve those goals. So we'll go down the line here. Similarly, PCI of 65, that actually can be accomplished with current staffing. That won't be an issue. We don't need any additional resources. To reach a PCI of 70 by 2024, we would be requesting one project manager, and we need to secure an on-call street resurfacing contract in order to meet that objective. And then similarly, to reach PCI of 75 by 2026, we need 3 new staff members. That would consist of 2 project managers and 1 assistant civil engineer. And again, we need to secure that on-call street resurfacing contract in order to actually make that happen. And finally, for PCI of 80, we need 5 staff members in addition to what we have now, which is 3 project managers, 1 assistant civil, and 1 junior civil engineer. And then we need to, again, secure that on-call street resurfacing contract for efficiencies to actually be able to meet those timelines. So let me get into the on-call street resurfacing a little bit more. We are recommending that City Council approve to enter into 2 on-call construction contracts. That's not for this item here. This is just a preview of what you'll be seeing coming to Council, hopefully by the end of July. And basically, this contract will help us streamline the street resurfacing process. Currently, it takes about 6 months from when we get all of the plans and specifications in order, put it out to bid, and then actually get that contract to Council for award. It's 6 months. So by having this on-call contract, we would actually be expediting every street resurfacing project by 4 to 5 months. We still need some time to get task orders in place once we have the on-call, which takes about what we anticipate 2 to 4 weeks. to process that internally. However, it would just help us actually tackle all of these road projects in a faster manner, right? The other contract is that we're seeking to get is an on-call for as-needed alley repair and reconstruction services as well. So that'll be essentially what we are calling our concrete on-call. Our intent is to replace our alleyways with concrete alleyways. They have a 30-plus year lifespan on them. It's cost-effective, and it'll be much easier to maintain. And so we would be requesting another contract for as-needed alley repair and reconstruction services to be able, again, to meet these deadlines per the Measure N guidelines. And we are recommending that the maximum dollar amount that be made available under these on-call contracts is $30 million a year. And so that aligns with not only getting our streets and alleyways repaired and reconstructed, but that'll leave some room for general maintenance that our streets division may need to tap into as well. So it is more than what you'll see in our capital program, but that gives us some room for our streets division to tap into this contract as well. And this does align with the necessary investment to achieve a citywide PCI of anywhere between 70 and 75, while also providing the necessary preventative maintenance. So what are the next steps here? We already went to the Public Works and Transportation Committee. Their recommendation was that we aim for a PCI of 70. So, that with that comes the identification of the funding to meet that gap to get to a PCI of 70. And council then needs to also agree on what PCI and funding level council as a whole wants to move forward with. So that is what we're here discussing today. Then I would be requesting to expedite the new on-call street resurfacing construction contracts that I just mentioned in the last slide. We do need to increase staffing as identified to match the desired PCI. So for instance, if we do stick to the PCI of 70, then I need at least one more project manager to help us accomplish that goal. I am recommending a standard plan update that is going to come to council in the fall, and that is to ensure that our roads are being constructed to modern day standards. Our standard plates have not been updated in some cases in over 15 years, so we just need to get those up to date and make sure that between Public Works and then our developers, we're all working off of the same standards and just making sure that that's all cleaned up. And lastly, we are also going to be establishing a moratorium to protect our investments. That'll be coming with that standard plate update that's presented to council in the fall. As far as the financial impact goes, there is no direct financial impact to receive this report and provide your input, dependent on the final recommendation to be approved by you, the council. The following impacts may occur. If you decide to maintain this repayment condition at an average PCI level of 65, there's no financial impact associated with this item. Or two, if council decides to support improving payment conditions to an average PCI level of 70, it is anticipated that this will cost an additional $43.7 million over the next 3 years, or $14.6 million annually. This amount can be covered entirely by the Measure O funds. Or finally, if council decides to support improving payment conditions to an average PCI level of 75, it is anticipated that this will cost an additional $116.1 million over the next 5 years, or $23.2 million annually. Approximately $80 million of that can be covered by Measure O funds, and the remaining $36.1 million would be covered by the general fund. Now, before I wrap this presentation up, I do want to take the time to acknowledge the incredible staff that's been working so hard over the last few years to get all of the roads that have been recently resurfaced. They have been working tirelessly for this. Their names are, so we have Asita with Anahe, who's kind of leading the design efforts, and under him we have Georgina, Juan, and June doing the actual plans and specifications of the drawings and whatnot. And then on the project management side, we have Gianna, who's actually making sure that everything is running smoothly on the construction side, managing the contractor, and of course our inspectors, Guillermo, Bruce, and Ramon, who are there to ensure that these improvements are being done to our standards and that they're up to code. So I just want to throw that out there, give them that acknowledgement, and thank them for their hard work. That does conclude my presentations. Thank you for listening, and I'm happy to take any questions.